the Washington Post has reported in the past about Trump and the intel briefings. Back in 2018, 3 people familiar with the matter told the Post that during the first year of the Trump presidency, the format of his intelligence briefings changed. Early in the administration, the president's public schedules showed he received the traditional briefings sometime between 9 and 10:30 a.m. Within a few months, his intelligence advisors began augmenting the sessions with maps, charts, pictures, and videos, as well as, quote, killer graphics, as then Intel Chief Mike Pompeo put it at the time. According to the Post, quote, several intelligence experts said that the president's aversion to diving deeper into written intelligence details, the homework that past presidents have done to familiarize themselves with foreign policy and national security, makes both him and the country more vulnerable. Just like the wacky concept of disinfectant that he grabbed onto, his brain grabbed onto the concept right before the briefing last Thursday, and he began to spew it out to the American people. Joining us from the White House, NBC News correspondent Carol Lee. Carol, in terms of how the president processes information, what more are you finding? I mean, what we realized during the campaign is that this man doesn't actually read. He's not able to retain information that from the written word.
Yeah, Mika, I mean, since the president took office, we've talked to people who've briefed him, given him intelligence briefings, members of his national security team who are trying to walk him through big national security issues. And he just has a way of being distracted. He has been told people he doesn't want anything that's longer than a single page. They use bullet points, they use visuals. And, you know, frankly, one of the big differences between President Trump and his predecessors is that it's called the presidential daily brief, but he doesn't get it daily. He gets it at max 2 or 3 times a week, which is already a break from how his predecessors have consumed intelligence. The other thing that we know from talking to people who've briefed the president on intelligence is that he tends to challenge what they're saying. And, you know, he'll say things like, I don't really believe that. Well, why is that true? And he'll come with his own set of facts at times, particularly on Russia. And the people who are briefing him don't really know where he's getting that information. And then the other thing, as you mentioned, is it's not always clear to the people who are briefing the president that he's taking in what they're saying. He sometimes can seem distracted. You know, he'll go off on a tangent if there's something that's mentioned, that's Russia, for instance, and then it'll kind of get off the rails. And so it's unclear exactly. Clearly, if he had more than a dozen briefings where the coronavirus and China were mentioned, you would presume that he would have taken that in and it would have been a warning for him. But we don't know because of the way that he tends to consume information. And I have to say that this is all something that's going to be looked at very in depth by Congress eventually.
You know, Willie, guys, this is something that, of course, was it was a big story after Secretary Mattis sat down with State Department officials and others and gave the President of the United States a quick primer on everything that's happened in the post-war world from 1945 forward, just stating the facts, talking about what the United States had done in the past, talking about its policies throughout the Cold War and into, obviously, the war against terrorism starting in 2001. And Donald Trump got up and was angry and was basically attacking them for stating what had happened, history. And he didn't like the fact that history didn't comport with his view of how the world should be, sort of a more isolationist America First world. And that, of course, the fact that he was incapable of taking in facts, the fact that he insulted generals, that was when Rex Tillerson, formerly of the State Department, got up and called him a certain kind of moron. This has been the problem with one briefer after another briefer after another briefer. If he doesn't like the truth, he just changes it. And in this case, he just ignored it time and time again. And now 57,000 Americans are dead.
Well, as you know, the president leads with self-interest. That's his first instinct. So if he's hearing information that shows Russia, for example, did put its thumb on the scale in the 2016 election in his favor and plans to do it again in 2020 in his favor, he doesn't want to hear that, so he's going to push back. What's unclear to me here, and to a lot of people, Carol Lee, I think in this case, is if the president had gotten out early in January ahead of coronavirus, if we're looking through his lens of self-interest, that only would have helped him. It would have slowed the disease. It obviously would have saved a bunch of lives. But if you think of it from his political point of view, it would have helped him to not be mired in this for months and months and months. So why did he ignore this so aggressively?
Well, we don't know exactly, Willie, but I've talked to people who are close to the president, advisors to the president, who've said that, you know, there are times when the president just doesn't want something to be as it is and will either just not pay attention to it or try to dismiss it. And if you look at what he was saying at this time about China, for instance, you know, he has a very specific agenda with China. He's trying to accomplish certain policies with China. He's said that he has a great relationship with President Xi. And, you know, he's getting these briefings, according to the Washington Post, and warnings about China. And at the same time, he's praising China's response to this. And so there is this belief among people who work for the president that at times, if he's presented with something, for instance, now we're looking at the economy. The economy is not going to be doing well in the coming weeks and months, and he's almost trying to will it not to be that way. We've seen that with his handling of coronavirus, and there's potentially some reason that could potentially have played into what he was thinking at the time while he is getting these briefings. But, you know, I would also add that the fact that he was learning this information then and he was saying what he was saying at the time about China really undermines his effort now to try to put the blame on China. If he knew back then that China was not being forthcoming about all this, he heard him say yesterday they're going to investigate they're investigating everything that China knew and when and what they withheld. Well, if his intelligence officials were flagging this for him at the same time that he was saying that Xi was handling the coronavirus epidemic in a very good way and had it contained, that raises a lot of questions.
It certainly does. Carol Lee, thank you so much. And of course, when you talk about China, whatever Donald Trump says moving forward about China, you will always go back to what he said on January the 24th when China was not cooperating with Donald Trump's own administration on sharing data, on sharing samples, on helping us prepare for this. Donald Trump on January the 24th tweeted that China was doing a great job handling this virus. He thanked President Xi for his transparency and thanked President Xi on behalf of the American people. Truly baffling, and he continued to do that in the coming months in between days when he decided, well, today I'm going to try to attack China. But then he'd always revert back to his praise for him. And Willie, it's interesting, you had Carol talking about how he tried to just wish things away in January. He tried to wish away the coronavirus, saying, oh, it's only one person, it's going to go away. In February, he said it was going to magically disappear. In April, when it got warmer, it was going to disappear. At the end of February, this was a month, of course, after Joe Biden was warning that the pandemic was going to be bad and Americans should prepare for it, and Donald Trump hadn't prepared for it. A month after Joe Biden's warning, in late February, Donald Trump is telling crowds, you know what, it's only 11 people, it's only 15 people, soon it's going to be down to 0, it's going to disappear. In March, he was still comparing it to the flu. He was pushing phony drug scams that the FDA now says could damage your heart. In April, of course, in this month, he's now moved on from phony drug scams to phony disinfectant light scams. Again, it's sort of wherever he wants to go. And now it's moving on to the economy with the President of the United States saying something that no conservative would ever say. I built the greatest economy ever. He's just darting all over the place, and he's wrong on every count. And I just got to believe, we're going to show some polls, I've just got to believe that's why his numbers are dropping.
Yeah, the numbers are dropping against Joe Biden, but also in terms of how the country trusts what he says or believes what he says. We'll get into that in just a minute. But I think you're absolutely right, Joe. He cannot plead ignorance in all this. He has said time and again, nobody could have seen this coming. Nobody knew. Well, we've known that isn't true based on reporting,
Right.
but now we know because of the Washington Post new reporting of the president's daily briefings through January and February that he knew very explicitly how bad it was. He knew very explicitly, as he praised President Xi, that China was suppressing information. And everybody should read this Washington Post story because coronavirus was not a footnote in the PDB. It was at the core of what the intelligence community was very worried about. And even knowing that, hearing that a dozen times, the president still went out and downplayed after he put in that travel restriction to China. He spent a month and a half downplaying how serious this was going to be.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, we're going to show you.
By the way,
Yes.
well, I'm just saying, there wasn't just a political impact to that.
Right.
There was a public health care impact to that. People went out because they believed the president. People didn't socially distance.
For sure.
There are still polls that show even now supporters of Donald Trump are less likely to social distance. Supporters of Donald Trump are less likely to understand how serious this pandemic is. His words have had a negative impact on the public health of Americans. So this is not just a political matter. Mm-hmm. This is a public health matter, and he's responsible for it. And we ask again on this day that he starts telling Americans the truth. He stops with his parade of CEOs. He stops with all the other nonsense he does in the afternoon, and let Dr. Fauci and let Dr. Birx speak.
Well, let them speak, let them run these things, and actually go to your briefings, listen to the briefings, however you can try and retain information as best you can.
He doesn't do
If
it.
you can't read, if you don't read because it doesn't work for you because you never did, then try and get the information. It was on you to read those briefings back in January. It was on you to listen to the warnings, and you didn't. And that's why we're here.
By the way, we need you to listen to the warnings now. We need you to listen to the briefings
Forget your
now.
briefings.
We need you to listen to the doctors now. Because guess what? It's probably, if history's any guide, Mr. President, I know you said it's going to magically go away in the fall, may not even come back in the fall, probably won't even come back in the fall, just like you lied in January and February to people and said this was going to magically go away in April. And today, more people died in one day in April than died during the entire 19-year war in Afghanistan that you've railed against for so long.
Watch.
Happened on your watch. We're asking you now, as we've been asking you for quite some time, please prepare for the fall, all right? Because your doctors and every medical advisor will tell you that if this hits during the flu season, and it's likely to still be around during the flu season, it will be even worse than what we experienced this spring. Willie.
And I think it's important to point out the false choice that's being put out. If people will say, well, what did you want the president to do when he heard these president's daily briefs? Do you want him to shut down the economy? No. What the intelligence community and what public health experts were telling him at the time and what they wanted him to do was to start what John Meacham just described, which is a Marshall Plan for testing the country, for getting personal protective equipment into hospitals and ventilators into hospitals, for preparing the country, not shutting down the entire country at that point, but taking the threat seriously and getting the country ready so then you didn't spend the month of March chasing what you didn't do in January and February.
All right, still ahead on Morning Joe. We're going to show you that new polling in the presidential race. Plus, one is a test, not a test. We'll play for you Vice President Mike Pence's rationale behind his promise of 4 million coronavirus tests by mid-March. That whole part of these things are getting hard to watch, the Pence part. And Republicans threw a fit when President Obama said about people who own a business, you didn't build that. So surely
They went crazy.
There is
They went
equal
absolutely
outrage
crazy.
with President Trump yesterday, giving himself the sole credit for building
You built the economy.
the greatest economy.
I built the greatest economy in the history of the world, Donald Trump said yesterday.
That selective outrage is ahead. And
you know what
Senator,
other conservatives have said that?
Who?
None. No one. Because no conservative says that.
Right. And Senator Chuck Schumer will be our guest. We're back in a moment.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.